The autumn sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Eleanor Morgan stood with her shoulders squared, clutching her handbag a little too tightly. At 63, she had never imagined starting over, yet here she was. The wrinkled auction notice fluttered in the breeze, the promise of a fresh start inked in bureaucratic language. Behind her, 8-year-old Sophie fidgeted while clutching the leash of Max, an aging golden retriever whose muzzle had long since turned white. "Grandma, are you sure about this?" Sophie whispered, her small hand finding Eleanor's. Eleanor squeezed back, summoning a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. 6 months since Richard's death, 2 months since her son Michael and his wife had manipulated her into signing away the family home. The betrayal still felt like an open wound. "Sometimes life gives you a second chance, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your grandfather used to tell stories about Oak Ridge. Maybe he was pointing us home all along." Max nudged Eleanor's hand with his wet nose, as if offering his own reassurance. The loyal dog had been Richard's constant companion for 12 years, and now he'd become Eleanor's protector, somehow sensing when her grief threatened to overwhelm her. The courthouse doors swung open, releasing a trickle of people onto the steps. Most wore the practical attire of small-town America, denim, flannel, and weathered boots that spoke of lives lived close to the land. Eleanor straightened her blouse, suddenly conscious of her city clothes. Do you remember the first time you had to start over? That moment when life forced you to reinvent yourself? Share your story in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this journey so far, hit the like button and subscribe to join us for more stories that speak to the heart. Inside, the auction room smelled of dust and old wood. Sophie settled into a creaking chair, Max curling protectively at her feet. The auctioneer, a thin man with perpetually darting eyes, shuffled his papers at the podium. "Next item," he announced, his voice lacking the customary enthusiasm of his profession. "Lot 17, cabin on Crow's Ridge, 12 acres, well water, outbuildings. Opening bid, 25 cents. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard. 25 cents for 12 acres and a cabin? In her peripheral vision, she noticed several men in the room shifting uncomfortably, their eyes anywhere but on the auctioneer. 25 cents, Eleanor called out, her voice sounding too loud in the sudden quiet. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, his eyes scanning the room expectantly. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. No competing bids came. "Going once," the auctioneer called, his voice oddly hollow. An elderly woman near the front turned to stare at Eleanor. Her weathered face creased with what looked disturbingly like pity. Something cold slithered down Eleanor's spine. "Going twice." "You don't want that place, dear," the woman whispered urgently, her gnarled hand reaching toward Eleanor. "Trust me on this." The gavel fell with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. "Sold to the lady in the blue coat for 25 cents. As Eleanor approached the podium to complete her purchase, the crowd dispersed with unusual haste. Fragments of hushed conversations floated back to her. "Should have told her. Nobody's been inside for 15 years. What happened to Thomas?" The auctioneer's hands trembled as he passed her the deed, his eyes carefully avoiding hers. "Ma'am, if you don't mind my asking, are you planning to live there?" "Yes," Eleanor replied. "My granddaughter and I need a fresh start." The man's face paled. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it with a sharp shake of his head. "Good luck to you," he muttered, already turning away. Outside, Eleanor was startled to find the elderly woman waiting, leaning heavily on a cane. "Martha Wilson." She introduced herself without preamble. "Been in Oak Ridge 72 years. That cabin you bought has history, Mrs.?" "Morgan. Eleanor Morgan." She hesitated, then added, "And this is my granddaughter Sophie, and our dog Max." Martha's eyes softened at the sight of the child, but hardened again when she looked back at Eleanor. "Morgan? Any relation to Richard Morgan from Chicago?" Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "My late husband. How did you—" "Thought as much," Martha interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper. The cabin belonged to Thomas Harrison. He and your husband were friends, once upon a time." "That's impossible," Eleanor said, her throat suddenly dry. "Richard never mentioned knowing anyone here." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Some secrets are kept to protect the ones we love." She glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Come by my place tomorrow, 415 Willow Street. There are things you should know before you step foot in that cabin." Max whined softly, pressing against Eleanor's leg as if sensing her distress. The drive to Crow's Ridge seemed to take them further and further from civilization. Sophie had fallen asleep in the back seat, her head resting against Max's golden fur. The old dog watched the passing landscape with alert eyes, occasionally standing to look out the window, his tail wagging whenever they passed streams or open meadows. "Almost there, old boy," Eleanor murmured, scratching behind his ears. "We'll get you a proper yard to run in soon." Richard had always said Max was more than just a pet. He had uncanny instincts about people and places. "That dog knows things we don't." He'd insist whenever Max growled at seemingly friendly strangers who later proved untrustworthy. The cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt path, partially hidden by tall pines and overgrown brush. It was smaller than Eleanor had expected, a single-room structure with a stone chimney and a small porch. The roof needed work, and the windows were dark with years of grime, but the logs looked solid. A faded "no trespassing" sign hung crookedly on the front door. "It's like a fairy tale house," Sophie whispered, now awake and peering through the car window. "Do you think there are bears?" "Only the friendly kind," Eleanor assured her, though she scanned the tree line nervously. "Let's have a look inside." The door handle turned easily, as if recently oiled despite the cabin's abandoned appearance. Inside, dust particles danced in the afternoon light, streaming through cracks in the shuttered windows. The air smelled stale, but not unpleasant. Max entered first, sniffing cautiously around the perimeter, his body language relaxed but attentive. Eleanor had learned to trust his judgment about new places. A simple table stood against one wall, 2 chairs tucked neatly beneath it. A stone fireplace dominated the opposite wall, cold ashes still piled in the grate. A narrow bed frame occupied one corner, its mattress long gone. Above the mantel, a rectangular patch of cleaner wood suggested something had once hung there, a painting or mirror that someone had bothered to remove. "Look, Grandma," Sophie called, pulling a dusty object from beneath the bed. "I found a book." It was an old leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Eleanor reached for it, but Max suddenly began barking frantically, pawing at the wooden floor in the center of the room. Eleanor knelt beside the agitated dog. The floorboards in the center of the room were arranged differently than the rest, cut and fitted to create a perfect square. Not damaged or rotted, but deliberately altered, then sealed with some dark substance that had hardened over time. "What is it, Max?" she whispered, running her fingers along the sealed edges. Max continued pawing at the floor, whining with increasing urgency. In all his 12 years, Eleanor had never seen him so fixated on anything. A shadow passed across the grimy window. Eleanor looked up to see a figure on horseback watching from the tree line. Even at this distance, she could tell the rider was deliberately staying hidden. When their eyes met through the glass, the figure immediately turned and rode away, but not before Eleanor caught a glimpse of a distinctive wide-brimmed hat with a silver band. "Grandma?" Sophie's voice quavered. "There was a man watching us." Eleanor pulled her granddaughter close. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're just new in town. People are curious." But as she spoke, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that curiosity had nothing to do with it. The watcher hadn't seemed merely interested. He had been keeping guard. The question was, guarding what? And from whom? As they settled in for their first night, Eleanor's dreams were troubled by whispered voices and the image of a sealed floor hiding terrible secrets. Have you ever felt that sensation of being watched, or discovered something mysterious that seemed to have a story behind it? Let me know in the comments. And if you're finding this tale intriguing, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss what happens next. The next morning, Eleanor left Sophie playing with Max in the cabin's front yard while she drove into town for supplies. The general store was nearly empty when she arrived, but the moment she walked through the door, the sparse conversation ceased. The storekeeper, a thin man with nervous hands, barely met her eyes. "Help you, ma'am?" "I need some tools," Eleanor said, placing coins on the counter. "Hammer, pry bar, some nails. I bought the cabin on Crow's Ridge yesterday." The woman at the fabric counter dropped her sewing basket, spools of thread rolling across the floor. An elderly man by the window shook his head slowly, as if witnessing something tragic. "That'll be $2, the storekeeper whispered, pushing the tools across the counter without waiting for Eleanor to inspect them. As Eleanor gathered her purchases, the store's back door opened. A tall man with sharp features stepped inside. She recognized him immediately as the watcher from the tree line. Up close, his silver-banded hat gleamed in the lamplight, and his coat bore the dust of a hard ride. "James Reynolds," he introduced himself, extending a hand that Eleanor noticed was callous from years of hard work. "Heard you made an interesting purchase yesterday." "News travels fast," Eleanor replied cautiously. "Especially bad news." Reynolds' smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here to make you an offer. $500 for that cabin. Cash in hand today." The storekeeper dropped a jar of preserves. The crash echoed through the sudden silence. "That's quite a profit margin," Eleanor said carefully. "Why would you pay so much for something nobody else wanted?" "Let's just say I have sentimental attachments to the place." "Sentimental enough to watch it from the trees?" Reynolds' hand moved slightly closer to his hip. "I've been keeping an eye on that property for a long time, making sure nobody disturbs what should stay undisturbed. But now that someone owns it legally," he pulled out a leather pouch heavy with coins. $500, final offer." Eleanor looked around the store. Every face reflected the same message: take the money and leave. Whatever was under that cabin floor, the entire town knew about it, and they all agreed it should stay buried. But something in Reynolds' desperation made her suspicious. Men didn't offer 20 times what something cost unless they needed it badly. "I appreciate the offer," Eleanor said, backing toward the door, "but I think I'll hold on to my investment." Reynolds' expression darkened. "That would be unwise." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm trying to save your life." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Every person in the store had gone perfectly still. Before Reynolds could explain what he meant, the sound of multiple horses approaching made everyone freeze. Through the window, Eleanor could see 3 riders dismounting in front of the store. "Too late," Reynolds whispered. "They know you've seen it." The 3 men who entered moved with purpose. The first, tall and lean with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest, scanned the room before his eyes settled on Eleanor. The second was older, well-dressed, with the soft hands of someone who'd never done manual labor. The third kept his hand on his gun and positioned himself by the door. "Harold Coleman," the well-dressed man announced, though he wasn't introducing himself to Eleanor. He was looking at Reynolds. "I thought we had an understanding about this situation." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "I offered her fair money. She refused." "Fair money?" Coleman laughed without humor. "You offered enough to buy a small ranch. Don't you think that might make her curious about why?" Eleanor realized she was watching a conversation that had been brewing for years. These men knew each other well, had probably discussed this exact scenario many times. "Gentlemen," she interrupted, "I don't know what's got you all so worked up about a rundown cabin, but have you opened the floor yet?" Coleman cut her off. The question hit like a physical blow. Every person in the store sucked in their breath at once. The storekeeper backed away from his own counter. "What floor?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew. Coleman stepped closer. "The sealed section. Don't pretend you didn't notice it. Everyone who's ever been in that cabin notices it. That's why nobody's lived there for 15 years. "What's underneath?" "Papers," Coleman said simply. "Old papers that some people would prefer stayed buried." "What kind of papers?" The deputy spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly from years of tobacco, the kind that could hang a man or make him rich enough to disappear forever. Suddenly, the pieces began falling into place. The cabin hadn't been abandoned. It had been quarantined. So the previous owner, Eleanor said slowly, he hid something and then what? Died before he could retrieve it? Murdered, Martha Wilson said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see the old woman standing there, her shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. Thomas Harrison was murdered 3 days after he sealed that floor, shot in the back while riding to town. Coleman's face went white. Martha, you need to stop talking. No, her voice was stronger than her frail appearance suggested. This woman deserves to know what she's gotten herself into. Thomas Harrison discovered something about the land deals in this county, something that involved very important people selling the same property to multiple buyers, pocketing the money, and disappearing. That's enough. The deputy moved toward Martha, but she continued talking faster. Thomas had proof, names, dates, forged documents. He was going to expose the whole operation, but they got to him first. Those papers under that floor could destroy half the wealthy families in 3 counties. The store went dead silent. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She owned property that contained evidence of a massive fraud scheme, evidence that powerful people had killed to protect. Now you understand, Reynolds said quietly, why I offered you $500 to walk away. But before Eleanor could respond, the deputy's hand moved to his gun. Too bad she knows too much now. We can't let her leave. The deputy's words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Before he could draw his weapon, Martha stepped directly between him and Eleanor. You'll have to shoot me first, Deputy Davis, she said calmly, and I don't think you're prepared to murder an old woman in front of a store full of witnesses. Davis's hand hesitated on his gun. He looked to Coleman for direction, but the well-dressed man was staring at Eleanor with calculating eyes. There might be another way, Coleman said slowly. What if Mrs. Morgan here became our partner instead of our problem? Reynolds scoffed. You can't be serious. Think about it. She legally owns the property. She can retrieve those documents without breaking any laws. We split whatever Thomas Harrison hid under there, and everyone walks away rich. Eleanor felt the weight of every stare in the room. What makes you think there's money down there? Martha said it was evidence of fraud. Thomas Harrison wasn't just collecting evidence, Coleman explained. He was collecting payment from the people he was planning to expose. Extortion, some might call it. Others might call it justice. Either way, he had accumulated quite a fortune before someone decided to silence him permanently. How much money are we talking about? Enough to buy half the territory, the deputy answered. Maybe more. Eleanor's mind raced. If what they were saying was true, the sealed floor didn't just contain evidence. It contained the profits from years of blackmail, money that Thomas Harrison had extracted from corrupt land dealers before they killed him for it. What's to stop you from shooting me the moment I hand over whatever's down there? Eleanor asked. Because we need you alive, Coleman replied. You're the only one with legal right to that property. Without you, we're just grave robbers. With you, we're business partners. Martha shook her head. Don't trust them. They killed Thomas. They'll kill you too. We didn't kill Thomas Harrison, Davis said, but we know who did. And if those documents see daylight, that person will kill anyone connected to them. The revelation hit like cold water. There was someone else involved. Someone more dangerous than the men in this room. Someone who had already committed murder and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Who killed Thomas? Eleanor demanded. The 3 men exchanged glances. None wanted to answer. Finally, Reynolds spoke. Someone with enough power to make this whole town forget it ever happened. Someone who's been watching that cabin for 15 years, waiting for the day someone would be foolish enough to buy it. Coleman added, the auction was public record. By tomorrow, half the territory will know that cabin has a new owner. Which means you have tonight, maybe less, Davis said. Once word spreads, they'll come for you. Eleanor felt the walls closing in around her. She'd bought what she thought was a bargain property and instead had inherited a death sentence. The documents under that floor were worth killing for, and someone had already proven they were willing to do exactly that. So what's it going to be? Coleman asked. Partner with us and live rich, or try to handle this alone and end up like Thomas Harrison? But before Eleanor could answer, a new voice spoke from the store's front window. "I'm afraid none of you will be living to see tomorrow." Everyone turned to see a figure silhouetted against the evening light. A rifle pointed directly at them through the glass. The killer had found them. Does that moment when everything changes happen slowly or in the blink of an eye? Think about the pivotal moments in your life as we continue our story. If you're enjoying this tale of mystery and courage, hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a good story. Now, let's see what happens next. The man who stepped through the door moved with practiced calm, his rifle steady in experienced hands. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and expensive clothes that marked him as wealthy, but his eyes held the cold certainty of someone who'd killed before and felt no remorse about it. "Judge William Stone," Martha whispered, her voice barely audible. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. A judge? No wonder the entire town had been too terrified to speak. This wasn't just about money. It was about the most powerful man in the territory, protecting his secrets. "Hello, Martha," Stone said pleasantly, as if greeting an old friend. "I was hoping I wouldn't have to see you again." "You murdered Thomas Harrison," she accused. "Thomas Harrison was a blackmailer and a thief. I simply administered justice outside the courtroom." Stone's rifle never wavered as he looked around the store, though I admit his timing was inconvenient. He sealed those documents before I could retrieve them. Coleman raised his hand slowly. "Judge, we can work this out. Nobody here wants trouble." "Trouble?" Stone laughed. "Mr. Coleman, you've been selling worthless land claims to desperate families for 15 years, using my forged signatures on fake deeds. You've stolen thousands of dollars from people who trusted the law. I'd say trouble found you a long time ago." The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Judge Stone hadn't just been covering up the land fraud, he'd been orchestrating it. His signature gave legitimacy to fake documents that Coleman and others used to swindle settlers. Thomas Harrison had discovered the scheme and tried to blackmail the judge, only to be murdered for his efforts. "What about the money?" Reynolds asked desperately. "Thomas collected payments from all of us." "Thomas Harrison collected $43,000 over 2 years. Stone said matter-of-factly, "Money that rightfully belongs to the families you cheated. I intend to return every penny to its proper owners." Davis laughed bitterly. "Noble of you, Judge, except you'll be dead within a week once word gets out about what you've done." "Word won't get out," Stone replied calmly, "because none of you will be alive to spread it." But even as he spoke, Eleanor noticed something crucial. The judge's hands weren't as steady as they'd first appeared. His left hand was shaking slightly, and there was perspiration on his forehead despite the cool evening air. This wasn't a cold-blooded killer. This was a desperate man trying to clean up a mess that had spiraled beyond his control. "You don't want to do this," Eleanor said quietly. "Murdering 6 people in a public store won't solve your problems. It'll just create bigger ones." "5 people," Stone corrected. "You're going to help me retrieve those documents from your cabin? Then you're going to disappear with enough money to start over somewhere far away. And if I refuse? Then you'll join Thomas Harrison in the ground." Martha stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "William Stone, I've known you since you were a boy, stealing apples from my orchard. Your father would be ashamed of what you've become." Something flickered across Stone's face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "My father never had to choose between his reputation and his survival. Martha, times were simpler then." "Times were honest then," Martha replied softly. The judge's rifle lowered slightly, just for a moment, but it was enough. Davis lunged forward, tackling Stone to the ground as the weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and suddenly everyone was moving at once. In the chaos, Eleanor realized something important. She was now the only person who could legally access those documents, and everyone in this room needed her alive to get them. Davis and Judge Stone rolled across the floor, fighting for control of the rifle. The deputy was younger and stronger, but Stone fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. Reynolds dove for his own gun while Coleman scrambled toward the back door. "Stop!" Eleanor shouted, pulling a small revolver from her handbag. The authority in her voice made everyone freeze. "All of you, stop moving!" Davis had managed to pin Stone to the ground, the rifle now several feet away. Both men were breathing hard, staring at Eleanor's weapon. "My husband taught me to shoot," she explained, noting their surprised expressions. "After he was mugged in Chicago, never thought I'd need it." "Here's what's going to happen," Eleanor continued, her mind working fast. "We're all going to that cabin together. We're going to open that floor, and we're going to see exactly what Thomas Harrison died protecting." "That's suicide," Reynolds gasped. "Soon as we open it, he'll kill us all." He nodded toward Stone. "No," Eleanor replied, "because the judge needs something from those documents that's more important than revenge. Don't you, Judge?" Stone's eyes narrowed, but he didn't deny it. "What's down there besides money?" Eleanor pressed. "What's so important that you've spent 15 years making sure nobody could get to it?" Stone remained silent, but Martha spoke from behind the counter. "Letters?" she said quietly. "Thomas told me before he died." Judge Stone wasn't just signing fake land deeds. He was taking orders from someone higher up, someone in the territorial government who was orchestrating the whole operation. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Judge Stone wasn't the mastermind. He was just another player in a scheme that reached all the way to the territorial capital. That's why you can't just destroy the evidence. Eleanor realized, those letters prove you were following orders, not giving them. Without them, you take the blame for everything. Stone's shoulders sagged in defeat. Governor Robert Webb has been stealing federal land grants for 5 years, selling the same parcels to multiple buyers, pocketing the profits, and using local judges to make it legal. I thought I was serving justice. I was just serving greed. So Thomas had proof of the governor's involvement letters with his seal, orders with his signature, payment records showing exactly how much money he made from each fraudulent sale. Stone struggled to sit up. Thomas was going to expose all of us, me, Coleman, the governor, everyone involved. But he wanted to be paid for his silence first. Davis laughed bitterly. So you killed him to protect a governor who would have thrown you to the wolves anyway. I killed him because I was stupid enough to believe I could contain the damage. Now I know better. Stone looked directly at Eleanor. That cabin contains enough evidence to hang half the territorial government. It's also the only thing that might keep me from hanging with them. Eleanor felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. She wasn't just dealing with local corruption anymore. She was caught in the middle of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government, and everyone involved would kill to keep their secrets buried. So we go to the cabin, Eleanor decided, all of us together. We retrieve the evidence, and then we decide what to do with it. What makes you think we can trust each other long enough to get there? Reynolds asked. Because right now, we're all dead if we don't work together. Eleanor holstered her gun and extended her hand to help Stone to his feet. The governor knows I bought that property by now. He'll send men to eliminate me and retrieve those documents. Our only chance is to get there first. As if summoned by her words, the sound of multiple horses approaching fast echoed through the evening air. Through the window, they could see riders surrounding the store. Too late, Coleman whispered. But Eleanor was already moving toward the back door. Martha, is there another way out of town? The old mining trail, she said, but it's dangerous in the dark. More dangerous than staying here? The sound of boots on the front porch answered that question. They had seconds before the governor's men broke down the door. They burst through the store's back door just as the front window shattered under gunfire. 6 of them, Eleanor, Judge Stone, Reynolds, Davis, Coleman, and Martha, stumbling into the alley where horses waited. Behind them, angry voices shouted orders as the governor's men realized their targets had escaped. The mining trail's a mile north, Martha gasped, struggling to mount her horse. But it hasn't been used in years. Could be washed out. Better than facing a firing squad, Eleanor replied, helping her up before swinging onto her own mount. They rode hard through the darkness. the sound of pursuit growing closer with each passing minute. The old mining trail was barely visible in the moonlight, winding treacherously between rocky outcroppings and loose shale that threatened to send them tumbling into the canyon below. Judge Stone's horse stumbled, nearly throwing him, but he managed to stay in the saddle. "How much farther?" he called out. "Another half-mile," Martha answered. "Trail comes out near the back of your property, Eleanor." The irony wasn't lost on her. They were risking their lives to reach the very place that had started all this trouble. But now she understood why that cabin had been worth 25 cents and why nobody else had bid. Everyone knew what was hidden there. They just hadn't known how dangerous it would be to possess it. Eleanor's heart pounded as she thought of Sophie and Max waiting at the cabin, unaware of the danger heading their way. She had left them alone, thinking they would be safer there than in town. Now she prayed she hadn't made a fatal mistake. They reached the cabin as the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon. No time to rest. The governor's men would find the trail soon enough. "Sophie!" Eleanor called as they approached. "Sophie, where are you?" The cabin door burst open, and Sophie ran out, Max bounding beside her. The old dog took one look at the group and positioned himself protectively in front of Sophie, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Grandma, I was so scared when you didn't come back." Eleanor swept her granddaughter into a tight embrace. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Something came up." She looked over Sophie's head at the group, dismounting behind her. "These people are going to help us with the cabin." Sophie's eyes widened at the strangers. Max's growl deepened as Judge Stone approached, his hackles rising. The dog bared his teeth, his normally gentle demeanor replaced with fierce protectiveness. "That dog knows what I am," Stone said quietly. Eleanor knelt to Sophie's level. "I need you to be brave again. There's something important under the floor that we need to get. Then we have to leave for a while." Inside, Eleanor went straight to the sealed section of floor, pulling out the pry bar she'd bought at the general store. 15 years, Reynolds muttered, watching as Eleanor worked to break the seal. 15 years, that floor's been closed. The dark substance that had held the boards in place cracked and split under pressure from the bar. One by one, the planks came loose, revealing a cavity underneath that had been carefully constructed to hide its contents. Max stood beside Eleanor, his attention fixed on the opening, sniffing intently at each board she removed. Inside was a metal strongbox and a leather satchel. Eleanor lifted them both out, her hands shaking slightly as she realized she was holding the evidence that had cost Thomas Harrison his life. The strongbox was heavy with coins, more money than Eleanor had ever seen in one place. But it was the leather satchel that made Judge Stone's face go white. Inside were dozens of letters bearing the territorial governor's official seal, detailed payment records, and copies of fraudulent land deeds that showed the scope of the conspiracy. "Dear God," Coleman whispered, reading over Eleanor's shoulder. "He sold the same parcels 15, 20 times each. Families in 3 territories think they own land that legally belongs to someone else." Davis found a letter dated just 2 weeks before Thomas's death. "Listen to this. Judge Stone, the Harrison situation has become untenable. Eliminate the problem by any means necessary. Our mutual friend will compensate you appropriately for your service. It's signed by Governor Robert Webb himself." "He ordered you to commit murder," Martha said, staring at Stone in shock. Stone nodded slowly. "I thought I was protecting the law. I was just protecting a criminal who saw me as expendable." Eleanor continued sorting through the documents, her fingers suddenly freezing on a photograph tucked between the pages. It showed 2 young men standing in front of a courthouse, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling broadly. One was unmistakably a younger Thomas Harrison. The other, Richard, she whispered, her voice breaking. Her husband, decades younger, but unmistakable. Attached to the photograph was a note in faded ink. "If anything happens to me, contact Richard Morgan in Chicago." Max whined softly, nosing at the photograph, as if recognizing his former master. Martha moved to Eleanor's side. "Your husband knew, didn't he? That's why he used to tell stories about Oak Ridge. He was trying to lead me here." Eleanor realized. All those stories, all those hints about a beautiful place in the mountains where justice prevailed. He knew Thomas had hidden something important, and he wanted me to find it. A yellowed envelope bearing Richard's name confirmed her suspicions. Inside was a letter from Thomas, dated just days before his death. Richard, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. The corruption goes higher than we thought, all the way to the governor. I've collected everything: deeds, payment records, orders, enough to bring down the whole operation. I've hidden it where we discussed. Don't come looking for it yet. Too dangerous. Wait until things calm down. Justice may be slow, but it finds a way. Your friend, Thomas. Eleanor wiped away a tear. He never told me to protect me. All those years, carrying this secret? But their discovery was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching fast. Through the cabin's grimy windows, they could see at least 8 riders surrounding the building. The governor's men had found them. Throw out your weapons and come out with your hands raised, a voice called from outside. You have 1 minute to comply. Eleanor looked at the evidence scattered around her, then at the faces of her unlikely companions. They had what they'd come for, but now they needed to survive long enough to use it. Max suddenly dashed to the window, barking furiously at the riders outside. His behavior was unusual, not fear, but something else. He kept looking back at Eleanor, then at the window, as if trying to tell her something. We need to make them an offer they can't refuse, she said, gathering the most incriminating letters, because this evidence doesn't just implicate the governor. It names every corrupt official in the territory, including some of the men outside. Judge Stone understood immediately. You want to turn them against their own boss. I want to give them a choice. Help us expose the real criminals or go down with them. Eleanor stepped onto the cabin's front porch, Max at her side, holding the leather satchel high above her head where everyone could see it. The 8 mounted men had their rifles trained on her, but she noticed something crucial. They weren't wearing official badges. These were hired guns, not lawmen. Before you pull those triggers, Eleanor called out, you might want to know what's in this bag. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, spat in the dirt. We know what's in there. That's why we're here. Do you know your names are in here too? Eleanor pulled out a sheet of paper. Payment records showing how much Governor Webb paid each of you to keep quiet about his land scheme. Seems he's been very generous with stolen money. Several of the riders shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. The leader's confidence wavered slightly. You're lying. Robert Webb has been planning to eliminate all witnesses for months. Eleanor continued, reading from one of the governor's letters, including the men he hired to do his dirty work. Says here he considers you all loose ends that need to be tied up. Judge Stone appeared in the doorway behind Eleanor. It's true. I've seen the orders. Once you eliminate us, there are more men coming to eliminate you. Webb can't afford to leave anyone alive who knows about his crimes. The hired guns exchanged nervous glances. They'd been betrayed by employers before, but never by someone with the power to have them legally hanged. Max stood at Eleanor's side, not growling but alert, his eyes fixed on one of the riders, a younger man at the back of the group who seemed less hardened than the others. What are you proposing? The leader asked. Help us get this evidence to the territorial marshal in the capital, Eleanor said. Webb goes to prison, and you testify against him in exchange for immunity, or keep following his orders and end up dead by sunset. It took less than 30 seconds for them to make their choice. The leader lowered his rifle and dismounted. What do you need? 3 days later, Eleanor stood in the territorial marshal's office in the capital, watching as Governor Robert Webb was led away in shackles. The evidence from Thomas Harrison's cache had been overwhelming hundreds of forged documents. Payment records showing Webb had stolen over $200,000 in federal land grants, and letters proving he'd ordered multiple murders to cover his tracks. Judge Stone had been arrested too, but his cooperation and the letters proving he'd been following orders earned him a reduced sentence. Reynolds, Davis, and Coleman faced various charges, but their testimony helped convict dozens of other corrupt officials throughout the territory. Martha had returned to her home with enough money from the strongbox to live comfortably for the rest of her life. Eleanor's way of thanking her for her courage in speaking the truth. As for Eleanor herself, she'd kept the cabin and used her reward money from the territorial government to turn it into a legitimate ranch. The 12 acres that had cost her 25 cents became the foundation for a new life with Sophie and Max. But the greatest surprise had come in the form of additional documents hidden deeper in the strongbox papers, proving that Eleanor's son and daughter-in-law had forged Richard's signature on the documents transferring ownership of the family home. With those papers, Eleanor had been able to reclaim her property and press charges against her own son for fraud. It had been the hardest decision of her life, but as Richard had always told her, justice doesn't mean getting what you want. It means getting what's right. Now, sitting on the porch of her renovated cabin, watching Sophie play with Max in the yard, Eleanor felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Thomas Harrison had died trying to expose the truth, and his death had almost been meaningless. Instead, his evidence had brought down the most corrupt administration in territorial history and returned stolen land to hundreds of families who'd been cheated. The cabin still stood on Eleanor's property, but now it housed legitimate documents, land deeds, cattle records, and legal papers that would never need to be hidden. The sealed floor had been replaced with honest oak planks, and the windows had been cleaned to let in the light. Max, now with a renewed spring in his step, had taken to patrolling the property each morning and evening, as if still guarding against unseen threats. His golden coat gleamed in the sunlight as he raced alongside Sophie, no longer just a pet, but a symbol of loyalty that had seen Eleanor through her darkest days. Sometimes late at night, Eleanor would sit in that cabin and think about the strange chain of events that had started with a 25-cent bid at a public auction. She'd bought what she thought was just property, but she'd actually purchased the key to justice for hundreds of families and redemption for herself. The 25 cents had been the best investment she'd ever made. Not because of the land or the money, but because it had shown her the woman she was capable of becoming when the stakes were high enough and the cause was just enough. She was no longer just Eleanor Morgan, grieving widow. She was Eleanor Morgan, rancher, and the woman who'd helped bring down the most corrupt governor in territorial history. And that was worth far more than any amount of hidden gold could ever be. Have you ever discovered that the most valuable things in life aren't what they first appear to be? That sometimes the real treasure is the courage we find within ourselves? I hope Eleanor's journey has inspired you as much as it has me. If it has, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, redemption, and unexpected second chances. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest adventures begin with just 25 cents and a leap of faith.